comeback, because the comeback, oh, it's devastating. Oh, does it destroy them? But they think, well, if I don't hear the comeback, it doesn't exist. Don't let your mom grow up to be that kind of a loser.
Love it.
Oh, thank you, sir. Can I get you a sticker?
Yes.
Appreciate you.
Absolutely, man.
Especially when you get out like the outer edges here, people say, oh, it's too far. Oh.
Yeah.
And then they say, oh, well, oh, like this guy right here. Look at this guy.
Yeah, yeah.
He's one spot over from you.
Get him.
All right, I will. Just because you said so. No, because it's my job. Oh, that's not where the car goes, sir. Come on now. Cars go right back there to the cart return.
I got a bad leg, sir.
Oh, how'd you walk all the way out here?
Well, what do you want me to do? You get paid for that.
No, I'm the cart narc. What I do,
Don't fuck with me.
here's a Lazy Bones on board bumper magnet. Put that right there. I'm sorry?
What you got there?
It's a magnet. It says I'm a Lazy Bones. That's talking about you, not me.
Fuck you then.
That's not
You fucking bitch. Get busy, do something.
my job. I am busy doing something, picking up after you Lazy Bones.
Shit.
Chest? What?
Fucking shit.
I can't hear you, sir. You're
Yeah, fuck you.
F my F. Oh. You know, some people, not many, but some people say, oh, these are staged. People wouldn't really be that nasty to other people, right?
Yeah,
Look what you just saw.
I do. I'm witnessed it.
He goes from 0 to not like, oh, I'm sorry, or blah, 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 to, first off, he gave me the hurt leg excuse, which, how'd you walk in and then out?
I followed him all the way out.
And then, when I don't buy his excuse, F. Look, you know, I'll give him this, at least he didn't try to hit me, which a lot of guys do too.
I imagine what people actually try to fight you sometimes.
They try, but I'm very fast.
Man, I love your work.
Well, thank you, and obviously, see, I love too about these sort of things is you can show that there are two options. You can be nice and sweet, or you could be like that guy.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being a responsible citizen, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you. Car Narcs out.
Welcome to Audit the Audit, where we sort out the who and what and the right and wrong of police interactions. This episode deals with knock and talk doctrine, license plates, and searches of private businesses, and is brought to us by a private submission. After midnight on February 5th, 2024, Officer Crawford and Officer Abel of the Waite Park Police Department were on patrol when they noticed an open garage door at a local upholstery business in Waite Park, Minnesota. The door was open because Hunter Clems, the brother of the shop owner, was inside working on his car, which had broken down and could not be driven home until it was fixed. The encounter that followed was captured on Officer Crawford's body camera.
Come to the door.
Officer Crawford knocks on the door of the business and tells Mr. Clems to, quote, come to the door. As we have covered in previous episodes of ATA, under the so-called knock and talk doctrine, police officers are legally permitted under the Fourth Amendment to go to private property, knock on the door, speak with whoever answers the door, and try to obtain consent to search the premises, even without any reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. This is because, in general, any member of the public can knock on a door to attempt to engage in a consensual conversation with whoever answers the door without violating a reasonable expectation of privacy. During a standard knock and talk, the individual inside the property can choose not to answer the door, and the officers will then need to leave the property. However, when officers take actions that would lead a reasonable person to believe that they must open the door, a consensual knock and talk can be transformed to a Fourth Amendment search and seizure. As the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, which has jurisdiction over Minnesota, explained in the 2006 case of U.S. versus Poe, quote, although a person who opens a door in response to a simple knock by officers knowingly exposes to the public that which can be seen through the door, we have held that one who does so in response to a demand under color of authority does not open the door voluntarily. In the Poe case, an individual opened the door only after officers knocked persistently for 10 minutes and commanded him to open the door. The court determined that because, quote, a reasonable person would have concluded that he had no choice but to acquiesce and open the door, the encounter was not a consensual knock and talk, but rather a Fourth Amendment search that must be supported by probable cause. Now, in this situation, Officer Crawford did not simply knock on the door, but he announced that he was the police and ordered Mr. Clems to answer. Based on these facts, Mr. Clems would have a strong argument that Officer Crawford's actions implicated the Fourth Amendment, and that he did not open the door consensually.
Wouldn't call myself police if I wasn't them.
What's up? Oh, sorry. I thought you were one of my buddies fucking with me. I'm sorry.
No, man. I came by, saw the garage open. It's 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh,
Trying to figure out what's going on.
I'm working on my car. I can't leave until I get fixed.
Okay.
You scared the shit out of me.
No worries.
I was over there drilling, so yeah.
Is it just you here?
Yeah, it's just me.
Okay. You have permission to be here, or is this your shop? Or?
Yeah, I have permission to do it.
Okay, is it your shop?
No,
Or
it's
you
my,
work?
it's my buddy's shop.
It's
But
your buddy's shop?
But I work here, and I'm allowed here. I have a key here, so
Okay.
I'm doing the transmission on my something on the transmission on my car, so
Okay.
I'm not allowed to. Can't really leave.
I gotcha. I gotcha. You got your ID on your butt?
No, I didn't commit a crime.
Listen here, man. What I'm saying is, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. There's an open door. You're inside. I'm asking for your ID. Just let my bosses know, my boss, who I'm talking to. You're not in trouble.
I don't need the ID. Exactly, I'm not in trouble.
Hey, let's not do this.
So here's part. I'm assuming you work here, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's say you don't. What? No, just
You
hold
guys
on.
are gonna give me the whole rundown and then try to give me the ID
No,
myself for no reason because I didn't commit a crime. I'm inside of.
It's
private
more than just a crime, man. You work here, right? Let's say we find the store open, no one in here, or it turns out it's burglarized, and I have to contact someone.
But it's not. I'm not committing a crime. You don't need my ID.
Cool.
The officers ask Mr. Clems to identify himself, and Mr. Clems refuses. Now, although Minnesota has not passed a so-called stop and identify statute requiring citizens to identify themselves to law enforcement, an individual who refuses to identify themselves during a lawful Terry stop can potentially be convicted of violating the state obstruction statute. Section 609.50 of the Minnesota statutes criminalizes obstructing, resisting, or interfering with a peace officer while they are engaged in the performance of official duties, and courts have found a refusal to identify to constitute obstruction under certain circumstances. We have discussed the details of identification requirements in Minnesota at further length in a previous episode of ATA, and I've included a link to this episode in the description down below. However, for this encounter, it is essential to note that, as the Supreme Court held in the 1979 case of Brown versus Texas, individuals cannot be criminally punished for refusing to identify themselves when the officer demanding identification does not have reasonable suspicion to believe that they are involved in criminal conduct. In this situation, the only basis for Officer Crawford's suspicion is that Mr. Clems was inside a private business after hours. There were no signs of forced entry and no signs of any sort of criminal activity occurring inside the business. Mr. Clems provided a reasonable explanation for his presence at the business that was consistent with the location, and the vehicle he was working on was clearly visible. The business owner had not reported an intruder at the property, and Officer Crawford had not received any calls reporting a break-in or unauthorized individual at the business. Accordingly, it seems unlikely that a court would determine that Officer Crawford had the reasonable suspicion necessary to require Mr. Clems to identify himself.
Wait,
That's how it is.
Oh, is that how it is?
Yeah, it is.
Charles David
I have
Roberts,
rights.
802. It's not about rights, man. It's about you're in a
I'm
shop.
not committing a crime.
We don't know that.
Well,
Or we call the owner. We figure out who you are.
so what's the crime? Suspicion?
Huh?
Since when is suspicion a crime?
Well,
when
say-
is we don't know that a crime?
What we're doing is we're gonna make it
You
a
guys
bigger
are
thing that needs to
disgusting.
be.
Get out of here. Look at my freaking license plate numbers. God.
Absolutely.
You guys are disgusting. Get out of here.
From the doorway, Officer Crawford looks at the license plate on Mr. Clem's vehicle and calls the number into dispatch. Courts have generally concluded that the Fourth Amendment does not require officers to have any level of suspicion to look at a license plate number and run a search for the number in a police database. As the Supreme Court explained in the 1986 case of New York versus Class, quote, "The state's intrusion into a particular area, whether in an automobile or elsewhere, cannot result in a Fourth Amendment violation unless the area is one in which there is a constitutionally protected reasonable expectation of privacy." In the 2002 case of U.S. versus Sparks, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals held that, quote, "No person possesses a privacy interest in their license plates. As such, officers can run tags of a vehicle in plain view without implicating the Fourth Amendment. However, officers cannot violate the Fourth Amendment in order to put themselves in a position to observe the license plate. Since, as we discussed earlier in this episode, Officer Crawford may have violated the Fourth Amendment by ordering Mr. Clems to open the door, it is therefore possible that a court would conclude that Officer Crawford also violated the Fourth Amendment by running Mr. Clems's tags.
You don't need my ID.
Well, we're gonna go down a road we don't really need to go down, man.
Why do I need my name in your system any more than it has to?
It's just you work here. Let's just make sure that you do.
How are you gonna prove that I do?
Huh?
How are you gonna prove that I do?
Well, I can always call the business owner in the morning.
I'm
Right?
gonna answer. She's sleeping.
Okay, I can call the business owner in the morning. I can give him your name,
Okay.
and he says, "Oh yeah, he works here. No problem." And we're done.
You ain't gonna call it then, because there's nothing going on.
But then, say you don't work here, right?
He's gonna call it in that his shop's been.
Yep, and then
So
I know.
right away in the morning.
And then I know who was here, and I
Yeah,
can
I
add
don't
him.
have to help you with your investigation.
Perfect.
It's on
Perfect.
my rights.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna check to make sure. Watch out.
But no, I don't know. I don't
Back
give you
up.
consent. I don't give you consent.
This isn't your
How
personal property.
not? What? How? You don't have the right to do this.
I do.
No, you don't. What are you gonna
Is it-
check for?
Who else is here? Just you?
Nobody.
Okay.
Dude, you don't have the right to do this. Get out of here.
It's not your personal property. I'm gonna make sure nothing looks burglarized in here.
Oh my God. You don't have the right to do
I
this.
absolutely do.
Nothing is burglarized.
Okay.
Get out of here. I did not give you permission to be in here.
Well, you don't have to give me permission.
Yes, I do. You can't just come into a private property.
Despite Mr. Clems's repeated objections, Officer Crawford searches the business premises. As the Supreme Court explained in the 1967 case of Camara versus Municipal Court, quote, "Except in certain carefully defined classes of cases, a search of private property without proper consent is unreasonable unless it has been authorized by a valid search warrant." Now, while the language of the Fourth Amendment only mentions, quote, "the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects," the Supreme Court has repeatedly held that business premises are protected by the Fourth Amendment. For instance, in the 1967 case of C versus City of Seattle, the Supreme Court determined that, quote, "the businessman, like the occupant of a residence, has a constitutional right to go about his business free from unreasonable official entries upon his private commercial property," and that, therefore, now quoting again, "the basic component of a reasonable search under the Fourth Amendment, that it not be enforced without a suitable warrant procedure, is applicable to business as well as to residential premises." It is important to note that, as the Supreme Court summarized in the 1987 case of New York versus Berger, quote, "the court long has recognized that the Fourth Amendment's prohibition on unreasonable searches and seizures is applicable to commercial premises as well as to private homes. An owner or operator of a business thus has an expectation of privacy in commercial property, which society is prepared to consider to be reasonable. An expectation of privacy in commercial premises, however, is different from, and indeed less than, a similar expectation in an individual's home. Nonetheless, much of the case law involving the so-called reduced expectation of privacy in business premises applies to administrative inspections designed to enforce regulatory statutes, not traditional police searches conducted for the gathering of criminal evidence. And since Officer Crawford was engaged in a criminal investigation and not an administrative inspection when he entered the business premises, which at the time were not open to the public, it is likely that a court would conclude that his search violated the Fourth Amendment, unless he had so-called exigent circumstances to enter the property without a warrant. The Supreme Court cautioned in the 1984 case of Welsh versus Wisconsin that, quote, exceptions to the warrant requirement are few in number and carefully delineated, and that the police bear a heavy burden when attempting to demonstrate an urgent need that might justify warrantless searches. The court then noted that it had only recognized a few such emergency conditions, such as the hot pursuit of a fleeing felon, the potential destruction of evidence, and an ongoing fire. Similarly, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals stated in the 2008 case of U.S. versus Williams, quote, exigent circumstances are present where lives are threatened, a suspect's escape is imminent, or evidence is about to be destroyed. And in the Poe case we discussed earlier in this episode, the Eighth Circuit noted that, quote, a legitimate concern for officer safety or the safety of others may constitute an exigent circumstance, and a warrantless entry into a residence may be justified if an officer has a reasonable fear of harm. Now, although there was clearly no ongoing emergency or a threat to anyone's safety, Officer Crawford could potentially argue that he was concerned that Mr. Clems could destroy some sort of evidence inside the premises. However, as the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals explained in the 1990 case of U.S. versus Munoz, quote, in addition to showing exigent circumstances, the government must show that the officer had probable cause to search the apartment. And as we mentioned earlier in this episode, it is doubtful that Officer Crawford even had reasonable suspicion, let alone probable cause. And as such, it is likely that a court would determine that the person's business violated the Fourth Amendment.
Get out of here.
Copy. What was that name again?
You can't just come into here over and over again. I didn't commit a crime.
Say it again.
I didn't commit a crime, so you can get out of here now.
10-4. Hunter?
Yeah.
Easy enough.
Yeah.
Have a good night.
Thanks for violating my rights.
It's not your rights.
Yes, it is. It's my rights. This is private property. You can't just walk in.
At 2 o'clock in the morning.
Private business. You get that? Private business.
Identify yourself.
Private business. I don't have to. I didn't commit a crime.
You're in a private business.
So?
At 2 o'clock in the morning.
Exactly.
Past
2
the hours.
o'clock in the morning does not matter.
Past the hours.
I'm over 18. Past the hours of closing. This is
Past the
private
hours of
business.
closing. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. The garage is open. You're inside. The business has been closed, I'm assuming, since about 5, 6 o'clock.
So what does that tell you? The garage
That
is
it
open.
could possibly be burglarized. Yeah, you could be in here doing something you're not supposed to. That
There's
you may not
burglarize.
have permission to
Why
be
would I
in
leave
here.
that open
Hold on,
if
hold on.
it's burglarized?
Hold on. I don't know that. But what I can do is now I can confirm that this vehicle was inside of this business. And if the owner calls in tomorrow and says, this person was in here and didn't have permission to be, then I know who I can come and talk to first. You understand?
Yeah.
Do you have
But
any
you're still
questions?
violating my rights.
It's not
I
your
don't
right.
have to tell you.
Well, you do.
No, I really don't. No,
We can make it a bigger deal
I
than
could
you
have just not answered the door.
You could have, and then I would have went in underneath.
They would have broke into a business.
That's not breaking in. I'm the police. I'm in charge to make sure.
You don't have rights. I told you you could not come in here.
Yep. And
You don't have rights to come in here.
Well, you're not identifying yourself. A business has been
I don't
closed
have
for
to.
hours.
I don't have to.
Like I said, I'm not.
I don't have to help you in your investigation, dude. So you can go into anybody's house. If anybody's house is
This is not a house.
Dude, it's a private It's a private property. No, it's a private property. Does it matter?
Yeah,
It's a private
absolutely.
property.
You're
You can leave.
Like I said,
You can leave.
did I explain my point?
No.
Do you have any questions about it?
Yeah, thanks for violating that.
It's not violating your rights.
Well, I don't have to let you in.
Yep.
So, and I don't have
You
to
don't
say
have
your
to
name.
let me in.
I don't have to
I
tell
don't
you
need
my
your
name.
permission to let me
I
in.
don't have to tell you my name.
You refuse to identify
I don't have to
yourself.
help you with my
You refuse to identify yourself in a business that's been closed after hours.
Shut
Do you have any questions about
Shut
that?
up.
I'll be contacting the owner, make sure you have permission in the morning. Okay?
I'll talk.
Have a good night.
Have fun.
After the officers left the business, they contacted Mr. Clem's brother, who confirmed that Mr. Clems had permission to be in the garage. The next day, Mr. Clems went to the Waite Park Police Department to file a complaint and spoke with Officer Abel, who maintained that he and Officer Crawford did nothing wrong, but provided Mr. Clems with the forms he needed to file a complaint. However, Mr. Clems told me in an email that when he returned the complaint forms, he spoke with a sergeant who told him that the officers were allowed to take the actions that they took. It is unknown whether Mr. Clems intends to pursue any legal action regarding this encounter. Overall, Officer Crawford and Officer Abel get an F for maintaining hostile and confrontational demeanors throughout the encounter, failing to take basic investigative steps before resorting to shows of authority, and likely violating the Fourth Amendment in the process. Although the fact that someone was inside the upholstery business late at night could potentially be suspicious, whether or not an officer has the reasonable suspicion necessary to detain and identify an individual is based on the totality of the circumstances. In this situation, the officers did not receive any calls regarding an unauthorized individual in the business, and there were no signs of forced entry. It also seems unlikely that an individual who was engaged in criminal activity inside the business would leave the garage door open to alert passersby of their presence. Rather than contact the business owner first, or even go to the door to engage in a consensual knock and talk, the officers ordered Mr. Clems to open the door, demanded that he identify himself, and then search the property without consent or exigent circumstances. This encounter demonstrates how officers can run afoul of the Fourth Amendment when they fail to make use of the many non-invasive investigative methods available to them, and instead immediately resort to unnecessary shows of authority. Mr. Clems gets an A for remaining relatively calm and composed throughout the interaction, refusing to identify himself when he was not legally obligated to do so, and attempting to challenge the officers' unconstitutional actions while avoiding physically interfering with them. Mr. Clems also did an excellent job in taking steps to pursue accountability after the encounter. In addition to voicing his disagreement throughout the encounter and immediately filing a complaint, Mr. Clems obtained the body camera footage and sent it to me to discuss here on ATA. I commend Mr. Clems for having the courage to speak up against police misconduct, and would encourage him to continue to learn about the Constitution and apply it to his future interactions with law enforcement officers. Let us know if there is an interaction or legal topic that you would like us to discuss in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out my second channel for even more police interaction content.